Money changes people. That's what my grandfather used to say. But I never really understood what he meant until the day he decided to test our entire family. What he discovered broke his heart, changed my life, and exposed the truth about the people we thought we knew. My name is Sarah, and this is the story of how my grandfather's final test revealed everything. Let me start by telling you about Grandpa Robert. He was 78 years old, a self-made millionaire who'd built his fortune from nothing. He started with a small hardware store in the 1970s and turned it into a chain of 15 stores across 3 states. By the time he was ready to retire, he'd sold the business for almost $4 million. Grandpa wasn't flashy about his wealth. He lived in the same modest house he'd bought in the 80s. He drove a 10-year-old truck. He wore jeans and flannel shirts. If you saw him at the grocery store, you'd never guess he had millions in the bank. That was just who he was. Humble, grounded, real. My grandmother passed away 5 years before all of this happened. After she died, Grandpa threw himself into being there for family. He had 3 children, my mother Diana, my uncle Frank, and my aunt Michelle. And through them, he had 7 grandchildren. I was the oldest at 26. Family dinners at Grandpa's house were a tradition. Every Sunday, we'd all gather around his big dining table. Grandma's china would come out, and Grandpa would cook. He loved cooking, said it kept him connected to Grandma's memory. Those dinners were loud, chaotic, and full of love. Or at least, I thought they were full of love. Everything changed one Sunday in March. Grandpa called a special family meeting. He asked everyone to come, said it was important. We all showed up, naturally. My parents, my 2 younger brothers, Uncle Frank with his wife and their 3 kids, and Aunt Michelle with her 2 teenagers. We gathered in the living room, and I remember noticing that Grandpa looked tired, older somehow. There was something heavy in his expression that I hadn't seen before. "I need to tell you all something," he said, his voice serious. "I've made some poor financial decisions over the past few years. Bad investments, mostly. I trusted the wrong people with my money." The room went silent. You could feel the shift in energy immediately. "How bad is it, Dad?" my mother asked, her voice tight. Grandpa looked down at his hands. "I'm broke. Nearly everything is gone. I've had to take out a reverse mortgage on the house just to cover my living expenses. My savings are depleted. The investments I thought were secure turned out to be fraudulent. I've lost almost everything." I watched the faces around the room. Shock, disbelief, and on some faces, something that looked uncomfortably like anger. "How could you let this happen?" Uncle Frank said, his voice sharp. "You're supposed to be smart with money. You built an entire business empire." "I got old," Grandpa said quietly. "I got trusting. And I got scammed. It happens to a lot of elderly people." "So there's no inheritance?" Aunt Michelle asked bluntly. "Nothing left?" The directness of her question made me flinch. Grandpa had just told us he'd lost everything, that he was struggling financially, and her immediate concern was the inheritance. "No," Grandpa said. "There's nothing to leave you." "I'm sorry. I know you were all counting on something after I'm gone." "Counting on it?" my mother said, her voice rising. "Dad, we've made plans. Frank has been looking at investment properties. Michelle was going to open her boutique. We've been planning our futures around your estate." "I didn't ask you to do that," Grandpa said, and there was an edge to his voice now. "I never promised anyone anything." The argument that followed was ugly. Uncle Frank accused Grandpa of being irresponsible. Aunt Michelle cried about her dreams being destroyed. Even my father, usually quiet and measured, expressed disappointment about their retirement plans being affected. I sat there feeling sick to my stomach, not because of the money, but because of how everyone was reacting. This man, our grandfather, was telling us he'd been victimized, that he was struggling, and all anyone seemed to care about was their potential inheritance. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "Stop," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. Everyone turned to look at me. "Just stop. Can't you hear yourselves? Grandpa just told us he's in trouble, and all you care about is money you never earned, money that was never yours to begin with." "Easy for you to say," Uncle Frank shot back. "You're young. You have your whole life to build wealth. Some of us were depending on this, depending on our father dying so we could get rich." I said, my anger rising. "Do you hear how that sounds?" The argument continued, but I couldn't participate anymore. I got up and went to the kitchen where Grandpa had retreated. I found him sitting at the table, his head in his hands. "Grandpa," I said softly, sitting down beside him, "I'm so sorry. About the money, yes, but more sorry about how they're acting. He looked up at me, and I saw tears in his eyes. I raised them to be better than this, he said. I don't know where I went wrong. You didn't go wrong, I assured him. This isn't your fault. But we need to figure out your situation. Are you really okay financially? Do you need help with bills? With the house? I'll manage, he said. But I could see he was struggling. No, I said firmly. You're not going to just manage. I'm going to help you. I don't have much, but I have my salary from the hospital. I can help with groceries, utilities, whatever you need. I was working as a nurse at the local hospital. My pay wasn't great, but I lived modestly. I could afford to help. Sarah, you don't have to do that, Grandpa protested. I want to, I said. You're my grandfather. I love you. That doesn't change because of your bank account. He hugged me then, holding on tight, and I felt him shaking slightly. In the other room, I could still hear my family arguing about money that no longer existed. That Sunday marked the beginning of a new chapter. Over the following weeks, I watched as my family's true colors emerged. And they weren't pretty. Uncle Frank stopped coming to Sunday dinners. When Grandpa called him, he was always too busy to talk. The few times they did speak, Frank would make pointed comments about poor financial planning and how disappointed Grandma would have been. Aunt Michelle visited once, asking Grandpa if he could take out a loan against the house to help fund her boutique. When he explained that he already had a reverse mortgage and couldn't borrow more, she left angry. She didn't come back. My mother kept coming to dinners, but things were strained. She'd make comments about how hard money was, how their retirement was uncertain now, how stressful everything was. She never asked how Grandpa was doing. It was always about how his situation affected her. My father seemed uncomfortable with all of it but didn't contradict my mother. My brothers, teenagers at the time, just followed their parents' lead. Meanwhile, I stepped up. I started coming over twice a week to help Grandpa with groceries and household tasks. I'd bring dinner on Wednesdays and spend the evening with him. We'd watch old westerns, his favorite, and talk about life. I noticed he wasn't eating well, so I started meal prepping for him every Sunday, making enough food for the week. When I realized his truck was having issues, I used my savings to help with the repairs. When his heating bill was higher than expected during a cold snap, I covered the difference. I wasn't rich. Every dollar I spent helping Grandpa meant cutting back somewhere else. I stopped going out with friends as much. I canceled my gym membership and worked out at home. I meal prepped for myself too, cutting down on grocery costs. But it was worth it. Grandpa had been there for me my entire life. Now it was my turn to be there for him. One Wednesday evening, about 2 months after the initial announcement, I found Grandpa looking at old photo albums. He seemed melancholic. You okay? I asked, sitting beside him. Just thinking about your grandmother, he said. Wondering what she'd think of all this. How the family has fallen apart. It hasn't fallen apart, I said. We're still here. You and me. You're a good girl, Sarah, he said. You remind me so much of your grandmother. She had the same kind heart, the same loyalty. We spent that evening looking through photos and sharing memories. Grandpa told me stories about building his business, about the early struggles, about how Grandma had worked right alongside him, keeping the books and managing inventory while raising 3 kids. We didn't have much back then, he said. But we had each other. And that was enough. I thought I'd taught my children that lesson. That family matters more than money. But maybe I failed. You didn't fail, I said. They're just lost right now. Maybe they'll find their way back. But they didn't. As months passed, the distance only grew. Uncle Frank and Aunt Michelle stopped calling altogether. My mother's visits became less frequent. And when she did come, she seemed resentful, like she was fulfilling an obligation rather than wanting to be there. I found myself getting angry at them. How could they abandon him like this? This man who had loved them, supported them, paid for their education, helped them buy their first homes, been there for every milestone. And the moment he couldn't be their personal ATM anymore, they disappeared. But Grandpa never spoke badly about them. When I'd express my frustration, he'd just say, "They're hurt. They'll come around." His faith in them never wavered, even when mine did. Then came my birthday in July. I turned 27. I wasn't planning anything special, just dinner with Grandpa as had become our tradition. But when I arrived at his house, I found something unexpected. The entire family was there. My parents, my brothers, Uncle Frank and his family, Aunt Michelle and her kids. Everyone who'd been absent for months suddenly showed up. Surprise! They shouted, though their enthusiasm seemed forced. I looked at Grandpa, confused. He just smiled and gestured for me to come in. The dinner was awkward. Everyone was overly friendly, asking me about work, about my life, making small talk that felt strained. Uncle Frank kept mentioning how he'd been meaning to visit more. Aunt Michelle talked about how important family was. My mother kept emphasizing how much they all loved me. Something felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on what. After dinner, Grandpa asked everyone to gather in the living room. He stood in front of the fireplace, and I noticed he looked different than he had in months. Stronger somehow, more certain. "Thank you all for coming," he said. "I know these past few months have been difficult for everyone. Today, I need to tell you the truth." My stomach dropped. Was he sick? Was something else wrong? "I lied," Grandpa said simply. "I'm not broke. I never was. Every penny I claimed to have lost is still sitting in my accounts. The bad investments, the reverse mortgage, all of it was a fabrication. A test." You could have heard a pin drop. Everyone stared at him in shock. "A test?" Uncle Frank finally said, his voice dangerous. "What kind of test?" "A test to see who really loved me," Grandpa said, his voice steady but sad. "To see who would be there for me when I had nothing to offer. To see who valued me as a person rather than as a source of future wealth." "That's manipulative," Aunt Michelle said, standing up. "How dare you play games with us like that?" "Is it?" Grandpa asked. "Is it more manipulative than my own children abandoning me the moment they thought I couldn't leave them money? Is it more manipulative than my family treating me like a bank account with a pulse?" "We didn't abandon you," my mother protested. "We were just processing." "Processing for 6 months?" Grandpa said. 6 months where you barely called, barely visited, barely acknowledged my existence? That's what you call processing?" He turned to Uncle Frank. "You stopped coming to dinners. You avoided my calls. The few times we did speak, you made it clear you were disappointed in me, ashamed of me even." Uncle Frank had the decency to look uncomfortable but said nothing. "And you," Grandpa said, looking at Aunt Michelle, "you came to me asking for money even when you thought I was struggling. You only cared about what I could do for your business dreams, not about me." Aunt Michelle's face flushed red, but she didn't deny it. "Even you," Grandpa said more gently, turning to my mother. "Your visits became obligations. You stopped asking how I was doing. Every conversation became about how my situation affected you and your plans." My mother started to cry. "Dad, we were shocked. We didn't know how to handle it. There was one person," Grandpa said, his voice softening, "who knew exactly how to handle it. One person who never asked about money or inheritance. Who never made me feel like a burden or a disappointment. Who showed up twice a week with groceries and homemade meals. Who paid my heating bill when she thought I couldn't afford it. Who sacrificed her own comfort to make sure I was okay." He looked at me, and I felt tears streaming down my face. I hadn't known he knew about the heating bill. I'd paid it directly to the utility company. "Sarah," he continued, "you remind me every day of why I worked so hard to build something. Not so my family could fight over it after I'm gone, but so I could take care of the people who genuinely cared about me." He pulled an envelope from his pocket. "This is my real will. Witnessed and notarized last week. I'm leaving everything to Sarah. The house, the investments, all of it. Not because I want to punish anyone, but because she's proven that she understands what really matters." The room erupted. Uncle Frank shouted that it wasn't fair. Aunt Michelle threatened to contest the will. My mother begged him to reconsider, saying he was making a mistake in anger. But Grandpa stood firm. "I'm not angry," he said. "I'm heartbroken. I'm disappointed. But I'm also clear about what I need to do. Sarah will inherit everything, with one condition." He turned to me. "If your family ever needs genuine help, if there's ever a real emergency or crisis, I want you to be there for them. Not because they deserve it, but because you're better than they've been. Can you promise me that?" Through my tears, I nodded. "I promise." "This is ridiculous," Uncle Frank said, grabbing his jacket. "You're a senile old man being manipulated by her. She probably put you up to this whole thing." "Frank," Grandpa said sharply, "I'm 78, not senile. And Sarah didn't even know about the test until this moment. Look at her face. Does she look like someone who knew what was coming?" He was right. I was as shocked as everyone else. I'd spent 6 months helping Grandpa because I loved him, not because I expected anything in return. Uncle Frank and his family left, slamming the door behind them. Aunt Michelle followed shortly after, not even saying goodbye. My parents lingered, my mother crying, my father looking torn. "Dad," my mother said, "please, don't do this. We can make things right. Can you?" Grandpa asked sadly. "Or do you just want another chance at the money? Be honest with yourself, Diana. If I told you right now that I was changing the will back, dividing everything equally, would you suddenly start visiting again? Start calling? Start caring?" My mother couldn't answer. The silence said everything. After they left, it was just Grandpa and me in that big house. I was shaking, overwhelmed by everything that had just happened. "I'm sorry," Grandpa said. "I know this isn't what you expected for your birthday. Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "About the test? I would have understood. Because I needed to see who you really were," he said gently. "If you'd known it was a test, your actions might have been different, even subconsciously. This way, I got to see your true heart. And Sarah, your heart is pure gold." "I don't want their inheritance," I said. "I don't want money to come between me and my family." "It already has," Grandpa said. "That's what the test proved. Money was always between us. I just made it visible." He sat down heavily in his chair. "Your grandmother and I came from nothing. We built our wealth through hard work and sacrifice. We wanted to leave our children something, yes, but we also wanted them to have the values that made that wealth possible. Hard work, integrity, loyalty, love that isn't conditional on what someone can give you. You taught them that," I said. "Mom, Uncle Frank, and Aunt Michelle all have good qualities. They're just lost right now." "Maybe," Grandpa said. "Or maybe I spoiled them. Made things too easy. They never had to struggle like your grandmother and I did. They never had to wonder where their next meal was coming from or how they'd pay rent. Maybe that made them soft. Made them take things for granted." Over the next few weeks, I tried to reach out to my family. I called my mother, my uncle, my aunt. Some ignored my calls. Others answered but were cold, accusatory. They blamed me for manipulating Grandpa, for driving a wedge in the family, for stealing their inheritance. It hurt, more than I can express. These were people I'd loved my entire life. And suddenly I was the villain in their story. Not because of anything I'd done wrong, but because I'd done something right. My younger brothers called me one night. They were 19 and 21, confused about everything. "Is it true?" my youngest brother asked. "Did you know Grandpa was testing us?" "No," I said honestly. "I had no idea. I helped him because I love him. That's all." "Mom says you manipulated him," my other brother said uncertainly. "Do you believe that?" I asked. "Have you ever known me to be manipulative?" There was a pause. "No," he admitted. "But this whole thing is messed up. Our family is falling apart." "It was already falling apart," I said. "Grandpa just showed us the cracks we were ignoring." They didn't know what to say to that. We talked for a while longer, and I could tell they were torn between their parents' perspective and what they knew of my character. Eventually, we agreed to stay in touch and let time work things out. Grandpa's health started declining a few months later. Nothing dramatic, just the slow fade that comes with age. His heart was weak, his energy low. The doctor said it was time to think about end-of-life care. I moved in with him. I took a leave of absence from work and became his full-time caregiver. We had nurses come in for the medical stuff I couldn't handle, but I was there for everything else. Meals, medication reminders, company, comfort. Those final months with Grandpa were precious. We talked about everything. His childhood during the Depression, meeting Grandma at a church social, building the business from a single small store, raising his children, his regrets and his joys. "I'm sorry I put you in this position," he said one evening as I helped him into bed. "I know my test made your life harder." "You didn't put me anywhere," I said. "You just revealed where everyone already was." "Still," he said, "family fractures are painful, and I caused this one." "No," I said firmly. "Their choices caused this." You just held up a mirror. 3 days before Grandpa died, my mother came to visit. It was the first time she'd been to the house in 6 months. She looked older, more worn. "Can I talk to him?" she asked me at the door. "He's awake," I said. "But he tires easily." She nodded and went to his room. I stayed out in the hall, giving them privacy but close enough to intervene if needed. I couldn't hear everything, but I heard my mother crying. I heard Grandpa's gentle voice. I heard her say "I'm sorry" over and over. When she came out 30 minutes later, her eyes were red and swollen. "Thank you for taking care of him," she said to me. "I know I haven't. I know I should have been here. You're here now. I said simply. She nodded and left. She came back the next 2 days, sitting with Grandpa for hours. I don't know what they talked about, but I could see something shift in both of them. A softening. Maybe not forgiveness completely, but at least understanding. Uncle Frank and Aunt Michelle never came. Grandpa died without seeing them again, though he asked about them right up until the end. His last words to me were simple. "Take care of them," he said. His voice barely a whisper, "even when they don't deserve it. That's what love is." The funeral was small. My mother and father came, along with my brothers. A few of Grandpa's old friends from the hardware store days, some neighbors. But Uncle Frank and Aunt Michelle didn't show up. They sent flowers with generic cards but couldn't be bothered to say goodbye in person. The will reading happened a week later. Everything Grandpa said was official. The house, the investments, the savings, all of it came to me. About $3.2 million in total, plus the house which was worth another $500,000. I was 27 years old and suddenly wealthy. It felt surreal and wrong. I'd never wanted this. I just wanted my grandpa to be okay. But I had made him a promise, so I decided to honor it. First, I set up trust funds for my younger brothers. They hadn't been involved in the ugliness, and they'd stayed in touch with me. They deserved something for that. Then I reached out to my parents. I paid off their mortgage. It wasn't about forgiveness or forgetting what had happened. It was about doing what Grandpa would have wanted. Taking care of family, even when they'd failed to take care of him. My mother cried when she found out. "You didn't have to do this," she said. "I know," I said. "But Grandpa would have wanted me to." I didn't reach out to Uncle Frank or Aunt Michelle. They'd made their choices, and they'd have to live with them. Maybe someday they'd come around, but I wasn't going to chase them. I kept Grandpa's house. I couldn't sell it, couldn't bear to let strangers live in the place where so many memories were made. I moved in, filling it with reminders of him. His favorite chairs stayed in the living room. His old westerns lined the bookshelf. His photo albums sat on the coffee table. I also went back to work. I didn't need the money anymore, but I needed the purpose. Nursing had always been about caring for others, and that hadn't changed just because my bank account had. I used some of Grandpa's money to fund nursing scholarships at the local college. I donated to the food bank he'd always supported. I helped fund a community center in his name. Money was a tool, and I wanted to use it the way he would have wanted. It's been 3 years now since Grandpa died. My relationship with my mother has slowly improved. She's made a genuine effort to rebuild trust, to show me she values me as a person and not just as the keeper of the family fortune. My brothers and I are close, thankfully. That relationship survived intact. Uncle Frank and Aunt Michelle have never reached out. I heard through my mother that Frank's business investments didn't pan out like he'd hoped. Michelle never opened her boutique. I don't take any pleasure in that. There's no satisfaction in their struggles. Just sadness that things ended the way they did. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Grandpa hadn't done the test. Would we have just continued on, everyone pretending to be close while secretly waiting for him to die so they could collect their inheritance? Would I have ever known what they were really like? Part of me wishes I didn't know. Wishes I could still see my family the way I used to. But mostly, I'm grateful for the truth, painful as it was. Because the truth is this. Love shouldn't be conditional on what someone can give you. Family isn't about waiting for your turn at the inheritance. And the people who truly care about you will show up when you have nothing to offer but yourself. Grandpa taught me that lesson in the most painful way possible. He broke his own heart to teach all of us what really mattered. And while I wish the lesson hadn't cost him so much, I'll never forget what he showed me. My grandfather pretended to be broke to see who really loved him. The results broke his heart, yes, but they also revealed the truth. And sometimes, the truth is the greatest gift you can give someone, even when it hurts. I think about him every day. I wish I could tell him thank you one more time. Thank you for the inheritance, yes, but more importantly, thank you for teaching me what real love looks like. Thank you for showing me the difference between people who love you for you and people who love you for what you can give them. And thank you for trusting me with your legacy. Not just the money, but the values you lived by. The kindness, the generosity, the belief that family should be there for each other unconditionally. I'm doing my best to honor that legacy every single day. That's my story. That's how my grandfather's test changed my life and broke my heart and ultimately made me understand what really matters in this world. It's not the money in your bank account. It's not the inheritance you leave behind. It's the love you show when there's nothing to gain from it. That's what lasts. That's what really matters. And that's the lesson my grandfather gave me, the most valuable inheritance of all.